What is the best argument the CES letter makes?
I think the best argument the CES letter makes is I encompass it in what I call leader fallibility. Where he points out things that previous church leaders have said or done that don't align with what we do today. I think that's the most effective argument that the CES letter does. And I think if you know much about church history, so take a step back real quick. I'm not joking. I thought missionaries were perfect. I didn't know any different until I became a missionary and I was in the MTC and I'm like, oh, these are a bunch of 19-year-old dudes. Like, that's when it occurred to me that they weren't perfect. And then I thought bishops were perfect. And then I was in a bishopric with a bishop. I'm like, oh, he's just a dude in his mid 40s. And so no one told us that prophets are infallible or perfect. No one told me the bishop was infallible or perfect. It's just like this assumption that I made. So, and I think many members of the church make the same assumption. And I'm not 100% sure where that comes from.
I wonder if it comes from if you're raised in the church, you make up your mind and you have ideas about what a bishop is at a very young age. And unless something significant happens, you don't really change that. So
Right.
until something happens to challenge that, you don't realize that you still have this young, naive perception of something, and then it gets challenged, and that's when you have to reform it. And so it's a harder thing probably for people who are raised in the church to not believe in this perfection, like this idealistic, unrealistic prophet, because like when you learned about a prophet when you were very, very young.
Right.
So anyways.
Follow the prophet, don't go astray. Right. I think there's an element there too. If the prophet is perfect, then we don't have to worry about anything. Just follow the prophet and you're done, baby. Right. And so there's a comfort in trusting in our church leaders. And by the way, this is not me saying don't trust in our church leaders. I think this presupposition, it comes from somewhere. So the CES letter rightfully points out areas where church leaders have been inconsistent from before to now. And I think that's something that members have to grapple with is how do I follow and sustain a man or men, church leaders who they have their own biases, they have their own axe to grind, and they don't get everything right all the time. How do I remain a member of the church and stay on the covenant path with that reality? So I think that's the strongest argument of the CES letter is it exposes this concept, which that's just one of those things I think as you learn more. And by the way, I think some of this is just when you learn more about history, you learn stuff, right? You learn these heroes, George Washington and all these other heroes, like they were complex people. In fact, my brother, who's very prolific, he's read everything. He reads a ton. He was saying, it doesn't bother me that church leaders in the past have made mistakes. It bothers me when the perception that church leaders today make no mistakes. That's what bothers him more. I think we can hold grace for our church leaders past and present and remain faithful. But yeah, I think that's something that I think the CS letter rightfully exposes. So I think it's its best argument.
I can see that too. When I was coming back to church, my two biggest hangups were I didn't believe that there was a man good enough to be a prophet, and the LGBTQ plus issues those were like my two things.
Yeah.
So what is the worst argument the CES letter makes?
I think it's Book of Mormon plagiarism, and it's by a mile. That's its worst argument. The strongest, or one of the strongest evidences for Joseph Smith's prophetic call is the Book of Mormon, right? Upstate New York farmer with, some education, but not a lot of formal education, suddenly from nowhere just makes up the Book of Mormon in under 90 days. It's incredible. And the book is layered. It's complex. It's beautiful. It's multivalent. Like there's just so many layers to it. So critics are stuck. Like, how do I explain this? So the theory that's been most popular in most of anti-Mormon history is plagiarism. Just Joseph was borrowing from, whether it's the Spalding manuscript or the View of the Hebrews or First Book of Napoleon, he's like borrowing from all these other places and compiling the Book of Mormon or the Bible, right? He's just stealing from places and compiling it. So their version of Joseph Smith is like he's got a mound of books that he's referencing and he's pulling in things, and that's how he's creating the Book of Mormon. That theory goes in and out of favor, depends on the decade. Since the CES letter, critics have actually shifted gears a little bit. So the most popular theory now for how Joseph Smith came up with the Book of Mormon is he just did it. He just made it up.
Made it up.
He didn't necessarily borrow from anything. He was good enough and smart enough that he just was able to just do it. By this theory, this is a little bit of a straw man, but I don't mean it to be. By the current theory of how he made up the Book of Mormon, he just made it up. It's basically saying any upstate New York farmer could have made up the Book of Mormon. It's a different way of phrasing it. It's just Joseph Smith happened to be the one who did. And so I think it's absurd. I think it's ridiculous. But that's the more popular theory now. But Jeremy Reynolds didn't write this in 2025. He wrote it in 2013. And so he's still going off of what was popular among anti-Mormon circles then, which was plagiarism. Critics don't really use that theory anymore because it's so bad and comes laughably short of it explained the Book of Mormon.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed this content, please like, subscribe, and share. The Be Faithful podcast is not endorsed or sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is my personal attempt to share the light of Jesus Christ and to testify that He lives. So please stay tuned for more inspiring conversations. And until next time, keep the faith.